Yeah, let's get started right at 6:30 today.
Good holiday. Good.
Up and to the left. I think up. Yeah, right over to the left. Careful though. All right. How's it going, Christy? Good to see you. Let's do it. Don't do it. I did it already. That's what I was saying. Hello, everybody. Happy New Year to folks who weren't here last night or joining us this evening. Welcome, everyone, to this meeting of the South Kingstown Town Council. This is a joint work session with the school committee to discuss our ongoing budget process, and in particular, the capital improvement program. Our first order of business is the pledge to the flag. Please rise and join us. Thank you. Now our land acknowledgement statement. The town of South Kingstown pays homage to the indigenous people and land on which the town is now located. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of our ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Narragansett tribe, whose land and water we benefit from today. All right, so this evening we're going to focus most of our attention on the school's capital program, but we will just begin very briefly with an overview from the town manager on the overall capital budget process.
Good evening. This is the second of two work sessions with the town council, and as the council president has mentioned, this session focuses on the school department's capital improvement program. I will run through a few slides from last evening just as an overview of the entire municipal capital program. Briefly, what is a capital improvement program? It is really an evolving document that's updated on an annual basis, and it's a financial plan that reflects the town's priorities in terms of infrastructure improvements over the course of a six-year term. The first year of any capital budget is the capital budget for the fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year, and it is incorporated into the operating budget of the fiscal year. For this coming year would be FY 22-23. And the 5 years following are really a strategic plan for what the town sees as priority projects and infrastructure improvements in order to ensure that we're looking ahead and focusing on the town's infrastructure. The CIP, as it's known, is developed with the assistance of many people, including department directors, division heads, superintendents, the town engineer. We work together to develop and prioritize projects that are important to the operation of the town. Boards and commissions are also involved with this project, with this budget, in terms of review and support. And the projects are ranked basically, highest ranking are health and safety concerns first, and then a variety of other metrics that are involved with prioritizing the projects. How affordable are they? Do we have enough resources to cover all of the projects? What is the impact on the overall town? So that's how the CIP is developed. And there are also a variety of funding sources related to the CIP. There are not just tax dollars involved with this. We have outside revenues. The primary funding source for capital improvement program are general obligation bonds. But we also have critical revenue sources for projects that may not be highest priority, but could qualify for funding from grant sources like state grants or federal grants or grants from nonprofit agencies. And we have some projects that are funded by, I'm forgetting the word, I'm sorry, the Neighborhood Guild Fund, which is self-sustaining, the wastewater operation and the water operations, those are enterprise funds, and they are self-funding. So there's a variety of sources that go into funding capital projects. For FY 22-23, this is a snapshot of the various categories of the capital budget program, the largest being the general fund, which is the municipal side of the capital budget, and the enterprise funds, and then, of course, the school fund, which is what we are here to have the council discuss tonight. And then we have our 6-year program comparison. So the full capital improvement program is a 6-year plan, and as you can see, for FY 21-22, the capital 6-year plan shows $114,496,647. The proposed 6-year plan for 22-23 through 27-28 is proposed at $121,422,285. So you can see comparison of the 6-year program that was established last year versus what is being proposed this year, and the various categories for funding, including the school program. And at this point, I think that gives you a general background of the entire, what a capital program is and the municipal program as a whole. The municipal side of the budget was presented last night. This evening, we have Assistant School Superintendent Gina Marie Masiello and Raquel Pellerin, the Finance Director for the school department, who are here to present the schools program. And if you'll give us just a moment, we're going to swap computers to get their slide presentation up.
Thank you, Terry. And I will just ask all our speakers tonight, our microphones here are quite finicky, so you really need to speak directly into them, bring them as close to your face mask as possible.
Good evening. My name is Gina Marie Masiello. I'm the Assistant Superintendent in South Kingstown, and with me tonight I have Raquel Pellerin, our CFO, and we also have Brian Mahoney, who is our newly appointed Director of Facilities. And what we are going to present to you tonight is the capital improvement program that was adopted by our school committee.
The school department, along with every other department within the town, under the code is to submit capital projects, including a summary of the capital projects, 6-year plan, for our pay-go expenses as well as our long-term major projects. So that is what we have here tonight to present to you. So when you're looking at it from a school department standpoint, historically, the capital improvement program has contained technology and facilities and maintenance purchases and projects beginning, and I think I want to take a step back. When it's adopted here, it's adopted as the capital improvement program. Historically, when it comes to the school side and it's adopted during the budget, it had been adopted under an umbrella of one budget. As you may remember, in the current fiscal year, FY 21-22, the school department, along with the school committee, made the decision to adopt a separate capital improvement fund. That way there would be transparency and an alignment between the projects that are adopted by the town council under capital improvement and the adoption of the capital fund within the school department's budget. If anybody ever has a chance to look on RIDE's website, you'd see per pupil, and you'd see that most school districts across the state do use that mechanism. It allows per pupil to be reported in an operational fund as well as a capital fund. We will continue to work on transparency, also looking at categorizing what is a capital expense or a project and what is an operating. So we're continuously working on that. We will be researching, as we're doing right now, all revenue sources to support the capital projects, as well as we have newly brought on a consultant who will be looking at the assessment and the development of a master plan.
So for our technology purchases for pay-as-you-go projects, what you see here is the actual 6-year plan. These are the requests for the 22-23 fiscal year, which is actually the first year of that 6-year plan. We are continuing to increase our one-to-one technology plan for our students, and this also is inclusive of a replacement plan. I'm going to have Brian Mahoney speak to the facilities.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. Next slide, please. So again, here's our 6-year breakdown based on the current buildings we have open, issues we've identified in the past, and what we need going forward, such as vehicles, HVAC, and a whole list of bathroom upgrades, chimneys, parking lots. So that's our 6-year breakdown right there. Next slide, please. Thank you. We originally had come up with 9 items that we identified that were part of our capital plan, but we really wanted to tackle the essential items. So we brought to your attention these 3 items. The first one being the Matunic fire alarm panel. Our local fire department, alarm specialist, and our vendor, Metro Fire, who does all of our inspection, has all recommended that this panel be replaced. It's over 30 years old and is starting to show faults in its age. So for life safety, that's one of our recommendations for a replacement. At the high school, we'd like to replace the cafeteria HVAC unit. There's currently 2 units up on the roof there. The space is built to have 2. There is a unit up there that is fairly new in comparison, but that's getting taxed on and running for the space that's supposed to be covered by 2 units. So we're actually burning out our unit that's working pretty well by not having the other unit. And that's been out for 3+ years. That unit's been down. Again, that'll increase the heat in there. We have a lot of public meetings in there, and also the air quality, which currently is at the standard for our schools, but whatever we can do to increase air quality, we're trying to do district-wide. And the third item we have is the Broad Rock Building PA system. This has been roughly down for 2 years. They do have telephones in each room where they can contact the teachers, but currently in a emergency situation, announcements, day-to-day activities, they can't get to the whole building, a broad announcement. So this will put an upgraded Cat 6 wired system in there because the system that was original to the building is no longer able to be fixed. We have a workaround currently, so there is a way to access an all call through the telephones. But in general, it's about a year and a half to about 2 school years, this school year and last school year. It's been down for. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you.
The pay-to-go expenditures. We do want to point out that the expenditures are subject to change. I know Gina will touch on this on a different slide about our long-term plan. There are a few decisions that will be made in the upcoming months that may change our pay-to-go section. We're now jumping from expenses to revenue or funding streams that we'll be exploring to support our capital improvement program. We're first looking at state, federal, local grants, and all other opportunities, as well as private donations. So we have active applications out for the Emergency Connectivity Fund. We're hoping to be approved for about $179,000 for that. We also have an active application with the Rybeck Capital Grant Program, and we're hoping to secure about $50,000 for our technology program. ESSER funding, so we're looking at the application that is due at the end of the month, that is ESSER 3. Really the goal of ESSER 3 is to focus on social emotional as well as learning loss, but we're looking to incorporate any capital expenses that we can within that fund. We also have ESSER 2, which is the current ESSER funds that are available to us. We'll be looking in the next few months at amending and seeing what our balances are. So we're looking to incorporate any expenditures, if applicable, in that grant as well. If we qualify for housing aid as well as any school building authority funding, we'll be researching that as well. The second pocket of money is use of fund balance. Our subcommittee has been working really hard at reviewing all our policies and procedures. The first one that we've worked on that we'll be discussing at the January 11th meeting is a review of our overall budget policy. Within that budget policy, there is a section on fund balance. And really how that speaks to capital, it is looking at the assignment of fund balance that's available to support one-time expenditures. And really that fits nicely within the capital program. Other funding sources that are available to support capital would be state funding formula, the funding formula for education, as well as any town appropriation.
With respect to our long-term projects, all right. We do have placeholders for Stage 1 and Stage 2 submission, and as well as placeholder for our educational planner. It's very early in the process right now, as we just partnered with Studio Jade, and they are currently actually doing assessments at each of our school buildings. On January 11th, our consultant will share the updates with our school committee. And then on January 18th, the school committee will have a discussion and a possible action about on restructuring and redistricting. And those decisions that are made at that meeting will then help us determine our future path. And that is what we have to present for you tonight.
I got a few questions for you here. First off, in regard to the fund balance there that you, Raquel, you said that you would designate an amount toward one-time expenditures there for capital. Can you tell us what the amount in that balance is?
the audited fund balance, I'm not sure if it's been released yet, is about $3.4 million. That's how we ended June 30th, 2021. Within the current capital budget for this current fiscal year, it's about $537,000 of use of fund balance for the current capital, as well as we have about $400,000 in it for our general operating fund for one-time expenditures within that fund. So if you're backing that out, you're looking at about $2.4 million. The policy that we have that we'll be discussing at the January 11th meeting really looks at assigning a percentage of the budget anywhere between 1 to 2% of the operational budget for unexpected emergencies. What we would also be looking at is setting aside a dollar amount close to probably $500,000 for Medicaid reimbursement, and the hope is to assign that to any tuitions that would come into the district unanticipated and unbudgeted, so it wouldn't impact the rest of the budget. Backing that out, when we're looking at what we would be, and this is just rough because the policy is in draft form and hasn't been adopted, we'd be looking at an available amount of money to apply to capital about $700,000.
Now, looking at this pay-as-you-go schedule over the 6-year period here, year one, fiscal year 22-23, $180,000, very manageable. As we go out, the subsequent year, just under 3.2, and around that as we go subsequent years. As to funding those one-time capital expenses and the pay-as-you-go in the subsequent years, will those be the same from the same revenue sources as you identified in the slides here?
I mean, right now they're really all subject to change based on the report and really the vote on the school committee. When we're looking at pay-go funding sources, we'd be looking at everything, yes, on that slide. The hope or the mechanism that we would be using, and I think you're referring to fund balance, is the timing would be, that we would be having some idea, an unaudited and possibly an audited balance going into January, right before the time that we'd be coming and discussing it with the council, and right before the adoption of the budget. We would have a known fund balance, how we end with, and we would know the dollar amount that we would be able to apply to future projects.
You likely won't be able to commit $3 million of fund balance toward that pay-as-you-go in fiscal year 23-24. I'm just trying to get an idea of what identified revenue sources in the subsequent year, because I believe this would be expected to be spent since it's so early on in the 6-year plan.
This was taking, and maybe Brian can speak to this a little bit better, this was taking the Jacobs report as well as an assessment of all the projects and really just pushing projects for 22-23 out to 23-24. And as Brian spoke before, really just focusing on essentials only, because we do understand there's a lot of decisions that will be made, and we wanted to make sure that we were fiscally responsible with that use of fund balance. So do I think that is subject to change, and it will change? Absolutely.
Understood. Thanks. I want to ask a little bit more about the school facilities plans here. I understand there's a bill that was put in the legislature that would effectively put a $300 million bond referendum on the November 22 ballot, which will keep the reimbursements going from the state for improvements to facilities. Now, can you tell me what the date at which construction has to begin to max out the reimbursements for the local towns?
I don't want to speculate. I don't know enough about that bill, but I can talk to RIDE tomorrow and get more information and get it out to the council.
Do you know what the date is currently before that bill passes?
If we were to look at the current approved stage 2 application that we have, I believe that it needs to be started. And I'm not sure, but if I just had to guess, it would be December of 2022. But that is just off the top of my head, and I'd have to, again, talk to RIDE to make sure that that was accurate.
Oh, there we go. That better? The discussions that we've been having, particularly with Dr. Pilata and the building committee, the anticipation without the legislation passing is that you would have to have the approval into RIDE, or the application into RIDE, by February, and shovels in the ground in December of '22.
Thank you, Mike.
I have a question. It's actually to go back, and if you could just re-explain a little bit more clearly. You were clear, but about the fund balance. Initially, I had written down that the schools have a $3.1 million fund balance, and then you noted a few other things, and then you came back to $2.4 million. So can you just go a little bit slower for everyone and for myself? Thank you.
I tend to talk finance all
No,
the
no.
time, so I
It's
totally,
okay.
I appreciate it when people say, "Can you clarify it?" Because for me, it's just the way
Second nature.
I live, right? So when you're looking at the fund balance that we ended with, and there's a lot of fiscal years, so it is the year that has ended, not the year we're currently in. So 6/30/21. The balance in the operational fund is $3.4 million. In the current budget that we're in, the school committee has voted to assign fund balance to our general fund for one-time expenditures, and that's about $400,000. And our newly adopted capital fund, which we're solely funding PayGo from fund balance, and that's a little over, and just using rough numbers, $500,000. So when you're looking at the 3.4 that we ended with, using roughly $1 million in the current budget of use of fund balance, now we're at the 2.4. We have a policy that will go forward to the school committee that will then say, out of fund balance, you would want to have a percentage of the operational budget for emergencies. So we wouldn't go back to the town council, we would use that for emergencies. If you're looking at a $60 million budget, 2%, now we're at 1.2. That would be backed out of that number, kept for emergencies only, and that would be at the vote of the school committee. The other thing that we had spoken about in our subcommittee is the huge change in a budget in a school district that is unknown is special education students coming in, special education students leaving the district, and services that they need at any time. If we didn't have a mechanism in place to then apply fund balance, you would have to cut something within the budget. So we do get Medicaid reimbursement. So we would say that we would assign a certain pocket of money just for that purpose in case that happened. If you're looking at Medicaid that comes into the district, now that's about $500,000. So going back, we now know that we have a $2.4 million because the million is assigned. The goal is to have that 1.2 on the side for emergencies, $500,000 for special education. That leaves us about $700,000 when we look at all our expenses. If the policy goes forward and it works like that mechanism constantly, during budgeting and during this discussion time next year, we would be saying, okay, we have X amount of fund balance, bringing it to school committee to vote to say, I'm going to assign it to this project and that project. So you would be keeping the fund balance at that certain amount of that mechanism, and anything over that would be applied to capital. I know that's a lot, but that's how we're hoping that it would work.
That was really helpful to me, so I really do appreciate it. It's much more clear about where the buckets are and then how you're going to use the money going forward. So my big takeaway is once you set aside 1.2 for reserve, there's another little bucket that will be used for special education unanticipated expenses. And then that third bucket, which right now is 700,000 will be used for capital projects.
Yes, and they would always be for one time because you really do not want to create a structural deficit by putting it anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another question? So, a new topic. Jade, Studio Jade, you mentioned that they're doing an assessment of all of the schools. Could you just share with all of us in the community some of the things that they're looking at and some of the information that you hope that they'll provide to you next week?
Brian can speak to that. He's actually been working with the consultants directly in the buildings.
Yeah, so we've been touring every day this week. As of today, they've gone through every single building other than the Hazard building. They're going to be back next week to check Hazard. So on site, when Studio Jade comes, they have their electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, two at some of the visits, and a building engineer. They've documented everything. It's been a very thorough process. The way they do it is they take pictures of every nook and cranny of the room, and then they use, from my understanding of it, their software or their data points to pretty much map out our whole systems. They're counting everything from smoke detectors, sinks, room sizes, every electrical panel, documenting it at every building, every mechanical. We were up on the roof at the high school, climbing around up there today. So they're doing a really thorough walkthrough, in my assessment. We're spending about 2 to 4 to 5 hours in every building. Every closet, every janitorial space, they're really doing a thorough job from what I've seen. Does anyone have any questions or anything on that end?
So regarding that, so they're going to present a report to you, and then will that be available to the community, or is that like a proprietary document?
I believe that would be reported out on January 11th. The first report out to the school committee will be on January 11th.
Okay. And then I just had one more question about that. So it sounds amazing, and I appreciate how clear and descriptive you were about the things that they're looking at, because I hadn't heard that, because I didn't hear that at the school committee meetings. But have we ever done that level of granular observation and assessment before? Do you know? Does anybody know? Have we done something to that level before?
Yeah, I've been here 3 years. We've had some of our HVAC companies go up and assess one roof at a time or one space, but in the 3 years, at least I've been here, we've never had someone go through the whole district and give an assessment on this level.
Okay. Thank you. Kate, did you have some? Michelle?
Can you hear me? Okay. Michelle just asked if RGB had done that, and I'm like, I'm not 100% sure what exactly they did, and also that was a number of years ago, so it was well before Brian and actually anybody but myself and Michelle. So,
thank you, and I really do appreciate the level of explanation, and I look forward to seeing that next week. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions regarding the presentation? Else?
Just another quick question as to the timeline for application and shovel in the ground. Now, I believe all the bill does that's pending extends it by 1 year, and I'm sure it's possible there could be subsequent bills and subsequent sessions which extend it further. But assuming the application needs to be in by February 2023, shovel in the ground by December 2023, is that something that's feasible to allow us to max out the reimbursement to get the full 50%?
Right now, we're not going to be in a position by February to have a new plan in. The difference is, it's not that all of the state housing aid money goes away. It's the extra 15% to bring it up to 50% reimbursement. There have been, in addition to the legislation, South Kingstown School Committee, East Providence, and Portsmouth, those are the three that I'm aware of, have all sent resolutions to the General Assembly asking that the program be extended. And I believe even the governor's most recent press conference, it sounded like there may be an effort there as well.
So operating under no rush type of thing, get the application right, and we expect the legislature and the governor to allow us extensions that we need to max out our reimbursement. Expect. Thank you.
Do you want to say something, Raquel?
Yeah, I do want to point out that we do have an active approved stage 2. It was that $7 million portion of the overall bond that went forward. When the bond failed, we still got that $7 million approved. And what that means is that we still have that reimbursement rate on the $7 million, and we would be looking to, when we do get the report back from the consultant, looking at pay-go expenditures that are on there, use of fund balance, and asking for that reimbursement. So that is, I just wanted to point that out, that it is possible for some of our projects to get reimbursement. We have to use it within the 5 years, and we do have one time to amend. So hopefully when the consultant comes forward with a master plan, we would be able to do an overall amendment of that $7 million in the interim before we go forward with a new necessity of construction, which would allow us to utilize that rate.
Does using the $7 million of PAYGO now influence the future application, stage 1 and stage 2? So
It's a timing thing, so when we start to go with the letter of intent, the clock starts all over again, and we would start with a new stage 1. So, timing is important, and when they're going forward with it, because you're right, we would only have that time to utilize that approved stage 2.
feel free also, school committee members, to ask or questions, give thoughts.
Raquel, I know we talked about this before last year, and you just went through the 3.4 and backed into where we would get to by holding money aside for different buckets. Where do we ideally want to always be so that we don't put ourselves in a bad situation? I know there was like a number or a percentage that you spoke about before.
So looking at best practices or policies with school departments, it's really different based on, the mechanisms that they have. You would have a regional school district that would have a different percentage than a local school district. And when you have a local school district, you're looking at, do they manage their own bank accounts? That would be something different. Using what we're doing here in South Kingstown, it would be 1% to 2% of the operational fund. Anywhere within there is which leaves you right now about 1.2 million, where you're able to, if there's an emergency, have a school committee or put it before a school committee to approve that use of fund balance instead of, seeking alternate funds. And then when there are districts that have huge turnover with special education or even out-of-district tuition, you want to put that aside to say there's also that piece of it that is a lot of transition throughout the budgeting process, so you don't hurt the overall operation of a budget. So that's what we're talking there. So for South Kingstown, it would be anywhere from 1% to 2% of the operational budget, as well as that amount for tuition. And the policy, I think we're going to talk more about it on the 11th. It's a good policy, and it really does define those mechanisms and what you would need to do from an administrative side and a school committee side to be able to assign it to a certain project or expenditure.
Thank you.
Ask a question about the facility, this slide that we're on. So I know that the school committee will be potentially taking a vote in January, and that might shift some of the projects around. So could you just, I'm looking at Curtis Corner, the parking lot, $750,000. which, I don't know, given that the Peacedale parking lot went way over budget, that might be an unrealistic number. But say that Curtis Corner is identified to close, then you would take that $750,000 and put it somewhere else? Where, like, how does that work?
So, again, a lot of this information came from the estimated numbers from the Jacobs report. The numbers aren't set for that certain dollar amount right now because we're in this transition. Ideally, you want to have a solid capital plan. You want to keep on the rotation of every 5 years having necessity construction stage 1 and stage 2, and you would have defined revenue assigned to all of that. If that was the case, you would be amending and going back and forth. Seeing where we are right now, I would say that if Curtis Corner closed, that expense would go away. It wouldn't be reallocated because we don't have that overall approval.
Okay. Say that part again. That expense would go away because?
So here I go trying to explain it in different terms. If you had an approved stage 2 that was by project with a defined funding source, give the example of a bond. Mm-hmm. If the bond was $3 million and you had that set aside, what you would then do is amend your necessity of construction to move it to another school or another expense, accelerate the plan back and forth. Mm-hmm. We don't have that right now. I think when you looked back at even the $7 million that we had approved, that was a $7 million worth of expenditures, but right now has no revenue assigned to it. If Curtis Corner does close, the expenditures from Curtis Corner would then not exist because the school wouldn't be a school anymore. Mm-hmm. So everything that you would see on the 6-year plan with Curtis Corner would cease to exist.
Okay. And then just a practical question. It just seems like there's $3 million of expenses assigned in 23-24. And is it a realistic ability to complete that work in that fiscal year?
Maybe Brian can speak to this, but I do want to say again, this was taking 2 different pieces of the puzzle and applying them here for a 6-year plan. It is subject to change, and it will change. So when we originally looked at this with facilities, some of those projects were in 22-23. And I remember it was overall the expectation that the $7 million of pay-go would then complement the bond. So Brian maybe can speak to realistically how that would all happen with his staff.
Yeah, and like Raquel had highlighted, a lot of these items are subject to change with which schools stay open. In a similar light, a lot of these came from historical, some from past reports, some from items that RGB had identified, some that our own techs have identified, and our vendors. So that's why that number comes in so large there. But if you see a lot of the large ticket items, say, Curtis Corners parking lot, if that did come offline, that's a large ticket. So I think that's kind of what gets the numbers, it is a very large number, but 2 of the larger projects on there. Also West Kingston HVAC, which we did the Matunic system a few years ago, which has been running great. But with having the report from Studio Jade, we'd have, a better idea if that's also backed up by their data. Again, that year, it kind of just all collided with taking the essentials only from this year, pushing everything forward based on what we thought internally, and that's kind of why you see a lot of the smaller items also that we had on our lists kind of got pushed off into the next year for our future planning. And they are, changeable, like Raquel said, such as the vehicle. We haven't replaced any vehicles in 3 years. Every year we've been pushing that back. So for the 23-24 year, we put in for 2 vehicles. But depending on how many maintenance techs we have, we currently only have 2 maintenance techs. We have 2 open positions also. So that's something that potentially could be bumped a year out if we still are unable to find maintenance techs.
Any other questions?
I just, excuse me, I just have a bit of a clarification. So I look at the CIP. The first year we look at FY23 right now will be in the budget for that the school committee will approve going forward for next year. Everything in the years out from that are kind of this is on our radar screen, and we're thinking we might have to do this, or we're thinking we might want this. And that's why it's so changeable, is because what you may need right now may change at the end of next year. So the CIP is a framework for what may happen. So everything past FY23 is always subject to change. Is that really boiling it down to layman's terms, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I'm clear that everything past FY23 is always in flux.
You done? And just to further reiterate sort of that statement for folks at home looking at this graph, which might be very hard to read, the basic brass tacks here, so to speak, are FY 22-23 here is $180,000. The reason that number is so low in comparison to the other years that you're seeing on this graph or chart is because so much is up in the air in terms of facilities planning that we're not going to spend money on facilities that we don't honestly know if they're going to be there. So we're pushing really probably some needed expenses into future years, keeping costs low this year, and that's sort of what we're looking at in this chart. Zach.
Just want to go back to Councilwoman Kelso's comments about the capital improvement plan. So yes, there is some opportunity for reallocating projects, but also in the capital improvement plan, we take a long time to determine that some projects will take multiple years. We've defined a set time frame that we want to accomplish that goal in from a funding source and from a project completion. So some of them are defined and determinable. Some of them do have some flexibility in being moved. This one on the school side, between the timing of preparing their CIP, their redistricting committee, there were a lot of unknowns up in the air at the time in order to meet the charter mandate and the state mandate to get a capital improvement plan, and we had to put something in there, but we also wanted to be realistic and know that there will be a need for some sort of project or a facilities plan in the future. What that looks like will be determined as we know, but we also know that it will be fairly significant in terms of dollars. If we took that out of our capital improvement plan, it would have an impact on the town's overall, potential for the town's overall credit rating, because we did put it in our last credit rating that we went through with the rating agencies, and they looked at that, and they factored that into our credit, and they determined that it wouldn't, while it would be a challenge, it would not have an impact on the town's rating overall. If we took that out of the plan, in the most recent bond offering that we went through for $7.5 million, they would have asked the question, what happened with your facility plan? Now you've taken this out of your 6-year plan. Have you completely abandoned any major projects? And it would raise a red flag to them. So by keeping it in, we told them we are committed to some sort of long-term plan. It's going to be redefined as time goes on, and it will be redefined by the school committee, and then it will go through the normal process. And they were pleased that we left that in as opposed to taking it out and trying to come back in another year and reassign it back into the capital plan, because then your comparative plan overall would look awkward in that you would have had this high total 6-year project for this year. Next year, if we took it out for this next year, it would come out, we'd have this low number. Then then in the third year out, when we came to you to submit that capital improvement, we'd be back up, and it would look strange as to, here we're trying to prepare and we're trying to budget not only for this year, but prepare for the out years that, we need to make sure that we can prepare the funding for that and be able to afford these as time goes on. So I apologize for my long answer, but...
But I just want to clarify again that what we're talking about there is the $78 million identified in the municipal CIP to put towards facilities if that happens, or when that happens.
That's correct. The school department is included in is for all intents and purposes, is another department in the town. And as another department in the town, we include that in the town's overall capital improvement plan. While they do operate and determine what they need and have it approved and then presented to us, but it is folded in with the town's overall plan because we need to, majority of their funding comes from the town, so we need to make sure that, we have to factor that in on the town side so that we can, from an affordability standpoint.
So we have the placeholder for the facilities improvements in the municipal CIP.
Correct.
That's where the placeholder is.
That's correct.
What we're looking at in front of us is not that, right? This is not addressing that. This is addressing the needs that were identified previously by the Jacobs report on facilities, the state of the facilities, the school facilities. That's what this CIP addresses primarily. I just want everyone to be clear that the $78 million bond, we are holding a place for that in the municipal CIP side, which we saw last night.
Thank you, Deb. Good clarification. Further on that point, do we think that, now that the schools are here and maybe they could have some input on this, that $78 million placeholder that we have is still an accurate number? And I mean, it's been a number of years since we sort of arrived at that number, and when we were talking about the facilities process, we were talking about an annual escalator of something like 6% for construction costs. So that $78 million figure has not moved from there over the years, and despite the fact that we might anticipate that 6% rise, are we saying that the scope of the project is diminishing over the years? That's the number that we can afford and can't go higher, or is that number still a good number?
We determined that as a council. We put that number on because we were, through the advice of the finance department, that was the top end of not impacting our bond rating, report, or whatever it's called. So that it was $85 million. We, as a council, authorized the school departments to look at facilities improvements that would reach that $85 million threshold. So I think it's probably going to be another council decision once we see the facilities reports on what the town can bear.
I agree precisely, but that's why I would love some input from the school committee, the schools, now that they're here, whether we feel that that number is still a good number to be talking about, or whether we need to be thinking about a different number there.
I'm happy to comment on that, in that that's why we have Jade Studio, or Studio Jade, and that's why we're relying on them to give us fresh eyes and to work with a new building committee and a new group of faces and minds to look at what exactly do we need, what might we want versus what can we afford. And so I think it'd be premature to say whether 78 is the number or not for us until we hear back from the planners.
Zach, so I just got a question for you. Deb's comments kind of led me to this thought. So will the school's budget carry the debt service costs for any facilities bonds that gets issued?
No, it would be carried through the debt service fund on the town.
So no impact on the school operational budget. It would just sort of be an increase in outlay of monies from the municipal side?
So it would fall under the town's overall budget. Debt service falls under that. The school debt right now that is currently carried the town is the one who actually takes on the debt overall, because we have the taxing authority. So
Yep.
we back the bonds, the good faith of the town and the town's credit. Those bonds go through RIBEC to be eligible for reimbursement. The reimbursements that come through are allocated to the debt service fund, or the debt fund, as opposed to this construction aid going back to the school. So it varies from community to community, but here the town takes on the debt. We carry it on the debt service, in the debt service fund. So it would be presented to you that way, and you would see that in the budget. When we would present the overall municipal budget to you, you would see what would be needed to fund the debt service on the municipal and the school, for any planned or existing municipal debt, or any planned or existing school debt.
So presumably, let's just say the debt service costs were $2 million over the duration of the bonds. Would the municipal side of the budget just have to figure out a way to come up with that additional, or find offsets to allow us to pay for that debt service?
We would, yes. We would. Which is what we have said in the past, that, we have to factor anything that takes place in terms of debt. It would be there's other things we have to consider in the operating budget. So every dollar that gets allocated somewhere else has to come from. There's only so much we can commit.
Thank you.
Fair share development fee that was retired in 2017, that we talked a little bit about last night, was put in place to pay for the Broad Rock bond. So that's when the council voted to no longer have that implemented, that fair share development fee based on the schools. That retired in 2017 when the bond was paid down. So that could possibly be another revenue source again. To look at reinstating that would be, a possibility.
So my question was also along the same lines. Are there other options for the debt service? Like, for example, Raquel, in the whole reserve fund and using the $700,000, is there a way for the council to communicate to the school committee, should you have surplus of X, transfer that, cover the debt service for the bond? Because it seems to me that typically the school budget has a surplus at the end of each year, and that's how that, I've lost the word, the fund balance has grown and grown. So is it possible to craft some sort of a agreement that should the school budget have a surplus, that money, X amount, say $350,000, goes to cover the debt service of the bond? Because I feel like people pay twice, because we're paying, and paying in the school system has a surplus, and then you're saying, and now you have to cover the debt service over here. So do other communities ever do anything like that?
It depends, I guess, will be my safe answer.
Right.
Yeah, that is something we could explore. I mean, there are a number of options. That is something we could overall, it would be a discussion. Once we know when an actual project is presented, what I will do is then take that, we will kind of run some different scenarios. We'll take it to our fiscal advisor like we did the last time, to stress test it and see if it is affordable.
Yeah.
We have capacity in debt, but just because you have capacity does not mean you have the ability to, just like anything else. You may have a high credit limit, but that doesn't mean that's what you want to spend. So I would be cautious, but $85 million was run multiple times, and every time it came back, it was, a positive that it would not have an impact on the credit rating of the town. The next project that would come out, whatever those numbers are, we will take them back, and depending on what the scenarios produce, we will come back and say either yes or no, or we'll present you with a recommendation that you'll make the ultimate decision, but we'll provide you with the information to make sure that So if there is a surplus, there is the potential to take that. We could work an agreement to use that towards debt service, or we could try to come up with a way to bifurcate some of the tax transfer to say some of it will go to debt service, some of it will go to operating. There are things we'd have to get into, but I don't want to speculate until we actually have a known an actual project that's going to be presented to you as a council and to the community.
Right.
But
Right. It just, for me, I try to always translate it into like a single household. So if I got a tax refund of money, I wouldn't go out and go on vacation. I would want to pay down my debt, and I wouldn't want to then charge my, I just wouldn't operate that way. So I'm trying to understand why the town would say the schools can have a surplus and use it however they want, and then all the rest of the town is going to cover the debt service for the schools. That's just how I'm thinking in my head about it.
So I can speak a little bit about surplus, and that this is how it is in Rhode Island, that a school department does retain whatever is ending at the end of the year. When we're looking at the example of what we ended in FY21, we ended with an overall balance of $300,000, and in a $63 million budget, when you're ending with $300,000, I mean, that's pretty good. By law, you cannot run a deficit. It's illegal. So the goal is to continue to improve with transparency, with reporting, and getting as close as possible as you possibly can, because you're right, this is one town, it's one budget, one funding source. And that's what the policy that we've explored in the budget subcommittee does. And what it's saying is we wouldn't go forward to a town council unless we've exhausted everything we possibly can to put back towards expenses, and to keep it at a bare minimum. Anything over that would be, in essence, put back to support the expenditures of the school district.
Thank you very much.
All right. Just to further clarify on that point, so the fund balance doesn't grow every year. So this year it's shrinking because you were a $300,000 surplus that went into it, and we're talking about $1 million coming out of it for the current year. So that's a $700,000 diminishment. So it fluctuates probably between this 2.4 million and probably some years it got up to maybe 5 million, something like that. All right. Any other questions about this proposed? So again, this current year that we're looking at is 180,000. The rest of this, 6-year program, fairly nebulous. A lot more than on the municipal side because, we just have a lot more definition to our projects that we know are going to be there. If I see no more comments, that does bring us to the end of tonight's agenda. I think, obviously, we're waiting for, what you're going to get back at the next meeting. So I would encourage everybody here to pay attention to that. There's going to be a lot more. Did you have some? Yeah. I think we've reached the end of the agenda tonight. So. Your microphone.
That's what
So yeah, maybe begin again, just sorry.
So I just wanted to, for everyone who's here and everyone who's listening, that on Monday from 4 to 6, we're going to have community forum open for the town manager search, and that is here, right, Terry? And then on Tuesday, it will be another community forum, and it will be at the senior center, and I think it's at noon. I thought it was at noon. 1 o'clock or 1 minute.
That's correct. So there will be two opportunities for the public to be in person, actually, with the firm, the executive search firm, and that will be Monday late afternoon here at Town Hall at, I believe it's 4 to 6 p.m., and then Tuesday at 1 p.m. at the Senior Center.
And also on Monday at 6 o'clock, we're going to have a work session on the animal ordinance. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion on the animal ordinance. So if people want to come to the work session for the council on Monday, it's at 6. So you can do the input on the town manager search and stay for the animal ordinance.
Yeah, anybody from the schools want to say exactly when this information and decisions will be made about facilities? Do we have set dates for those decisions? People are probably very interested in that.
We're getting information from Studio Jade on Tuesday, and I think as far as setting a date for a decision to be made, we need to hear what they have to say. They're the professionals. We will probably have additional information coming to us on the 18th, and we're not going to, right now we're saying we're waiting for the information from them because none of us are interested in making a decision unless we're informed and have all the information that we need.
Anything, Terry? All right. Well, thank you all for attending. I hope you gleaned some good information here. I think this is it's a very reasonable ask from the schools on the capital side for this coming year, and I appreciate the presentation tonight. Terry? Yeah.
I'm sorry, just one other thing. In terms of the schedule for the capital budget planning, January 24th will be the council meeting where there will be the public hearing on the capital budget. So that is the opportunity for public comment on the capital budget that's proposed.
Thank you, Terry. And everybody have a very good evening. We'll see you next time.